Hello everyone, greetings from the 7th of Nero, AJ here with a continuation of the piece concerning jacks. In all honesty, when originally written it turned out to be a great deal longer than intended, so it got cut in half rather roughly. This is that second half, or at least that's what I first thought, before I got through all the material to finish things off and ended up with something even longer, so this is actually the second part of 3, which was incorporated into the title of the first installment. A convenient case of future-proofing that managed to work out for me. But as a result, this is a little shorter than normal. While most players know steamjacks or their variants from War Machine in their warjack varieties, Labourjacks and maintenance thereof, or jacks in general, are background details that are typically unimportant but tend to be the thing that one thinks about as a part of random train of thought, in the shower or at the fridge or whatever. Naturally, more lore is available for the steamjacks of the titular Iron Kingdoms than jacks of other designs as by the other races, though some of it still applies there, even if much of it is hand-waved to some degree. What should be noted is that Labourjacks are by far much more commonplace in the Iron Kingdoms than warjacks. They account for a great deal of the manual labour force available to many nations, and in some cases, Labourjacks with better than average cortexes, or even just average cortexes, are repurposed for military use. Thus, they also account for most produced cortexes. However, this is perhaps more the case in the kingdoms of Rule, Signar, Lael and Ord. In Cador, the materials necessary for high-grade cortex production is lacking, and the production process itself is highly restricted, so most available resources are invested in warjacks, while Labourjacks tend to be older, based on mass-produced designs, and used and repaired until exhaustion, something that is exemplified in the Lackeys chassis. Meanwhile, in the Protectorate, the theocracy has strict regulations in place concerning the production and use of cortexes, and the lack of call for Labourjack production has resulted in its almost complete absence in the nation's manufacturing output, whether of Labourjacks themselves or as facilitated by Labourjacks. Those that can be found in the Protectorate are either cobbled together from different chassis or smuggled from another country by defectors. The two other realms that make extensive use of warjacks, the Nightmare Empire of Grix and Ios, have no tradition of Labourjacks, using other means, whether necromantic or ancient arcane, to supplement their existing workforces. In the former case, the low quality of cortex that is characteristic to Labourjacks, combined with necrotide fuel, make for an even more unpredictable product, and in the latter case, an extensive history of using Arcanica and arcane magic means that Iosans have never acquired the necessity for jacks that are not military in purpose. Also, Ios's low population limits that nation's cortex production output, resulting in a high base level of cortex quality that is wholly unsuited to installation in Labourjacks. Labourjacks that are produced in those nations that use them have a great deal less oversight than warjacks, for obvious reasons. As a result, there is a great deal less regulation, which leads to a large disparity in quality between the best and worst of Labourjack chassis and cortexes. Also, due to the diversity in personnel across the Iron Kingdoms that work on Labourjack production and maintenance, customization is often very common. This is made even more the case due to the variety in steamjack production facilities that exist across the Iron Kingdoms. While none are as large as the Signarin Armory or the Regavna Complex, the main centres of warjack production in Signar and Cador respectively, manufacturers can vary greatly in size and output. Naturally, fabrication is largely centred around the crafting of the cortex as the most intricate component, requiring most skill, specialist materials and training to perform. Even so, manufacture of the chassis can still be done independently from the cortex, so the arrangement for full assembly of Labourjacks can come from numerous sources. However, for the most part, workshops across the Iron Kingdoms are able to produce all parts of a jack by themselves, and those that cannot will purchase cortexes from artificers. Qualified ones, usually. These latter workshops often specialise in Labourjack maintenance, as they will have all the tools and mechanics available that will be better suited to repairs and replacements, rather than production. Workshops that have in-house artificers who possess the prerequisite skills to assemble cortexes can still vary in both quality and quantity of the jacks that set foot off their production floors. In this way, contracts and capabilities can range from generic Labourjacks that are sold in large numbers into heavy labour-intensive industries, to specialist custom jacks that are produced in prescribed batches or even one-of-a-kind designs with an up-to-RM-grade cortex to fulfill much more detailed and specific contracts. Production of Labourjacks follows much the same pattern as for warjacks, if with perhaps a little more freedom. The basic construction is as much as identical, with the typically Ferromore Cupernum grade cortex placed somewhere close behind the head that contains the audio and visual sensors. Connected to the cortex is a network of pipes that also lead to the limbs, allowing it to command movement. And the chassis is powered by a boiler and firebox, necessitating a fuel hopper for the jack's autonomy. Unlike warjacks though, the parts of the chassis are generally of inferior quality, often through the use of weaker steels, as they are not expected to be able to withstand the damage and strain of combat conditions. As such, their fuel consumption is a great deal more predictable, and maintenance is carried out less frequently than on a warjack, though of course this depends on numerous factors, including the attentiveness of the Labourjacks operator, the jack's age and designated functions, and the quality of previous maintenance work. And just as how warjacks will often have a particular tactical purpose, Labourjacks will have a task that it is designed and built for that supplements townsfolk or villagers in their work. Provided there is a need for heavy but simple labour, this includes, but is not limited to, railway expansion, agriculture, haulage, construction, mining, logging, and dockside unloading and loading. Labourjacks are valued for their physical strength and tirelessness, as well as the simplicity with which they can be operated once they are provided with sufficient instruction. Thus, they are eminently suitable to these industries due to the prevalence within them for heavy lifting, and since much of it revolves around the simplest of tasks, namely picking something up and putting it down elsewhere. They may do so with greater efficiency than any living creature, and with a great deal less complaining. Even so, most chassis are designed with multi-purpose flexibility in mind, and many are capable of being applied to different lines of work with minimal adjustment to the jack's configuration. However, the main limiting factor is the cortex. Being of low quality, Labourjack cortexes usually need a lot of time and effort for jack marshals to re-educate them for a new task or the geography of a new location where they work. It is often quicker to conduct a cortex wipe and train it from blank. Despite this, most Labourjacks are still designed with an industry in mind, taking historic lessons and precedent into consideration when they are built. For example, the suitably named Labourjacks are often of higher quality in metallurgy and cortex quality than, say, their equivalent hauling jack, not just because they need to act precisely when cutting wood or moving lumber, but also because the buzzsaws they are outfitted with must sometimes be used as weapons due to the nature of logging expeditions that often run into local wildlife of the dangerous sort, for whom small arms are not quite effective enough. Similarly, the Labourjacks that are contracted for the construction of important or high-status buildings have high-grade cortexes to ensure precision. The quality of the cortex often goes hand in hand with the experience and skill of the Labourjack's controller, or marshal. In smaller settlements, this is oftentimes the mechanic who performs day-to-day maintenance, but in more industrialised areas, the marshal will be a specialist who knows both the work in question and the best ways of making the most of a Labourjack's qualities. The ratio of jacks to marshals is rarely any indication of skill or quality of either the metal mind or the living one. This depends entirely on what needs to be done, their complexity, and the amount there is to do. Indeed, having multiple marshals for one jack is not unknown so that the jack makes no error, and the reverse is also true, when care is not so necessary, thus many jacks can be directed by a single, if skilled, individual. One odd industry out is mining. Experts in mining methods, the Dwarves of Rule construct Labourjacks for their mines more than for every other industry put together. Such is their ruggedness, reliability, and suitability for the narrow confines of subterranean mines, Rulic mining jacks have often been leased or exported outright to mining interests in Lael, Kedar, or Signar, in preference over many jacks of human design. But no matter to what purpose a steamjack has been designed or built, they all go through the same steps when a marshal, warcaster, or other operator activates them for transport or work. From empty resting, it can take the better part of an hour to start a steamjack. Ideally, the fuel hopper is filled with finely crushed coal and the boiler loaded with fresh water. These are the optimal materials, though other inferior fuels or muddy water can be used if they are the only things available. Their use does necessitate prompt maintenance of the steamjack to clear out the steam network and ensure that use of a less than pure quality fuel did not cause any damage to the firebox or boiler. After the boiler and hopper are filled, a fire is started in the firebox and gradually stoked to bring the water to boil and increase the steam circulation and pressure to a functional level. This also serves to activate the cortex and awaken the jack, as it were. At this point, a steamjack can be issued commands, if its security measures have been negotiated of course, and control the steam pressure and fuel consumption independently, something that a mechanic would be responsible for otherwise. In general, steamjacks can be loaded with up to around the order of 500 pounds in weight of fuel, which can last them up to a couple of days depending on level of activity, with a ratio of 1 pound of coal to 5 pounds of water. The fuel load naturally varies depending on the weight class and design. Because of these complex needs, jack operators prefer having them move under their own power only within a local area so as not to have wasted the time in their daily activation, but also because long distance travel for steamjacks is exceedingly expensive and time consuming. When a steamjack needs to be transported across the country, or as is the case for warjacks from the factory to the front of war, railway is the favoured mode thanks to its speed and cost effectiveness. Where train networks do not reach, the good old-fashioned horse and cart suffice for long journeys by road. One aspect of Labourjacks that cannot be overlooked is their disposal. Most operators are fairly mindful of the decommissioning and scrapping of the jacks that they use, and sell off the parts or recycle them. Some, however, are not so conscientious, not so much of the materials that they might lose, but of the cortex that they are getting rid of. The cortex is a complex device to make, so provided it is not damaged beyond reasonable repair, nearly every Labourjack operator will endeavour to salvage and install it in a new chassis, whether with or without a cortex wipe. Occasionally though, whether through negligence or other malice or foolishness, damaged but still repairable cortexes and the jack within which they are housed are junked. Once again, the cortex is a complex device that is a product of both magic and science. Through exposure to particular stimuli, whether it be commands or the conditions that it operates in, they are known to acquire certain unique characteristics that manifest as behavioural quirks, such as the spinning of a hammer, adopting a certain pose when idle, and so on. The effect of damage on these characteristics is not well studied, but occasionally a damaged cortex of a discarded jack will somehow acquire independent sentience, an awareness of what they are, how they function, and, bizarrely, what is needed to repair themselves. Quite how they repair themselves, though, is a mystery, as these sentient cortexes form strange bodies of accumulated junk around them that defy any Labourjack design philosophy. These constructs are junker hulks, strange parodies of steamjacks whose origins are not fully understood. Confined to the scrapyards of Western Amoran, their appearance has no pattern, and how they survive, if such a word is suitable here, remains unknown. They can be destroyed easily enough for an uncoordinated jack in what seems to be like a frenzy, but to prevent them from reforming, the cortex must be retrieved. Regrettably though, those that have been removed from junker hulks have provided little information concerning how they come to be, or the means by which they persist without fuel or direction. Nevertheless, the core working parts of junker hulks are essentially those of the original steamjack that was scrapped in the first place, so there is an evident limit to what the warped cortex can do to construct and maintain the junker hulk's body. And though the Labourjacks which these junker hulks and responsibly disposed parts come from comprise the majority of constructs that are built on the basic principle of the steamjack, there are other forms of jacks as used elsewhere, the topic of future discussion.